Thank you so much. Okay. Hi, everyone. Oh, God, you're like a bunch of high school kids in the morning. My name is John Muldoon. That was quite the intro, by the way. Thank you. I am the principal of the high school here on the Puxi campus of Shanghai American School. And I'll tell you, I'm a little nervous to be standing up here today. I've stood on this stage a lot this year, and I've talked with a lot of different people. But there's something about that like red dot back there on the ground that is intimidating. And part of what I'm going to talk about tonight is about being honest with yourself and other people. And so I figure what better way to start than say that I'm a little nervous and be honest with you. Also, you laughed a lot during the last one, which I think makes the bar pretty high for me. So here's the thing. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about, and there's a disclaimer here, in a very unscience-y way, okay, about the brain and about being very intentional about what you allow to take up space in your brain and the kind of course that you chart for yourself. And maybe part of why I'm nervous is I saw our school psychologist out here, and I'm sure, there he is, yeah. So I'm sure that the psychologist in the crowd is going to be very analytical with the advice I give all of you, so I hope none of it is malpractice. Here's the thing. Our brains are supremely powerful organs, and we don't often think about how we're using them, right? I can pinpoint the first time I actually thought about how we use our brain. I was in 6th grade. So I was in 6th grade, and I'll be honest with you, my family was going through a really hard time, a really horrible time, actually. And we were spending a lot of time in the car. So my dad's driving, my mom's sitting next to him up front, my sister and my brother and I are in the back, cramped. It's always a good recipe for something, right? And my father is compulsively listening to motivational tapes, right? Yeah, cassette tapes, right? Yeah, so he's listening to cassette tapes with all these people who are telling me and my family through the speakers of the car how great life is and how awesome we are and how everything is going to be amazing. It was like the worst, right? It was objectively the worst thing ever and totally not what I wanted to hear when I was going through some horrible things that I could not control. And I'll never forget, I remember this one in particular, this guy, I should ask my dad if he still has the tape. So this guy says that the key to happiness is to talk to yourself. But not just like talk to yourself, right? To say like really great things to yourself. He's like, you should wake up every day. And it sounded so ridiculous, I actually listened to it, right? He's like, you get up every day and you go to the mirror and you look at yourself and you're like, you look good. Today is going to be awesome, right? And he said if you do this all the time, you'll actually get little voices that develop in your head that say nice things to you all day long. And so here I am, I'm like 11 or 12 years old, and I'm like training your brain to get little voices that talk to you all day long. Yeah, like I'm pretty sure that's the mark of something not good, right? I mean, I can't tell you how many fights we had about this as a family, mostly started by me, right? Like, why can't we just listen to the radio like a normal family? But I'll never forget it. Part of it is because we were going through what was probably the darkest chapter of my father's life. And he chose to listen to somebody tell him good things. That was a choice he made. I didn't understand that back then. So if you fast forward a little bit, I had just become an assistant principal in my life, right? So I guess we're fast forwarding a lot. I'm feeling pretty good. And I find out that my favorite teacher ever, my 6th grade social studies teacher, is retiring. So I'm like, I'm going to stop by and see him. That day I drove to the school. I didn't tell him I was coming. I just went. I don't know why I did. He was my favorite teacher. He helped me through so much in that same time period in my life when I went through so much. So I just walked. No one stopped me. It was amazing. I walked right down the hallway, right to his old classroom. He's still there like he always was. Right? I open the door and I go in. And he looks up at me and he goes, "Holy hell." Well, actually, that's not what he said. I can't tell you what he said on this stage, but he said something like that. And he comes over and he gives me this big hug, and he says, "John Muldoon, I can't believe you're still alive." Right? And I'm like, "Are you confusing me with another John Muldoon?" But he wasn't. And actually, the truth is that he was right. We talked a lot about it. He only knew me at that time period in my life. I'll tell you, I was so angry, right? And our parting thought, he left me with. So he's not around anymore. It's a little sad to think about. But the parting thought that he left me with was how proud he was of seeing me and how happy I seemed, because he said in over 35 years of teaching, he had never met an angrier kid than me. And it's kind of funny, but it's also kind of tragic that I remember him so fondly, and I think about, that's his memory of me, of like all the anger. Anyways, the change didn't happen overnight for me. If you fast forward a little bit, or actually rewind from when I became an assistant principal, I was in ninth grade, I was in high school. Things were still not going well for me. I was actually angrier than I had been in sixth grade, which is saying something. I didn't have any friends. I was so isolated. My grades were awful. Like I am not ashamed to tell you, I was just about to fail out of high school by the middle of the year, of my freshman year. And I had this another history teacher that took an interest in me, right? It's probably my second favorite teacher. Maybe why I became a history teacher myself, actually. And he was like a Jedi, right? I owe this man my life. He conducted what I can only call psychological warfare on me. He got me so angry that he tricked me into wanting to do well at school. I don't know how he did it. I think about it now, I have no idea how it happened. But it did. And please do not underestimate the magnitude of this transformation. I was talking with my counselor about how I was not going to be coming back to school next year if I didn't turn things around, right? And all of a sudden I was getting all A's and B's. And I was being nicer to people. And I actually maybe was working my way towards making friends, right? Yeah, or whatever. The transformation was so severe, my father sat me down and he asked me if I was on drugs, right? And that's pretty messed up when you think son, your grades have just gotten really good. And, it looks like maybe you have some friends now and you're not so miserable to be around. Are you on the drugs? Right? That's actually how it went. But this rosy period of my life was not destined to last because, as I think everybody here knows, you really can't trick a halfway intelligent teenager into doing something they don't want to do for too long. And so by the end of the year, the gig was up, and I had this huge confrontation with this teacher, which, if we're being honest, was not smart on me to pick a verbal fight with a Jedi psychological warfare mind master. But I left the year feeling so angry and deflated and confused. And thinking, though, is the key word. I left the year thinking, how did this happen? And I was thinking about it because I was so angry at myself, actually, that I had let him trick me. And so I didn't know it at the time, but I was in search of an epiphany. And I wish I could tell you that it happened and it was amazing and it was this moment that changed everything right away and it was on top of a mountain and, right? But it's not how it happened. I was at work at this horrible summer job. And it wasn't something that happened and changed my life right away. But I'm standing there, I'm at work, and this mom comes in with this little kid. And he's got one of those little Matchbox model cars, right? You know what I'm talking about? So he's got this little Matchbox car. And I hope you're ready for this. It was a model of my dad's old car. Like the same crazy sparkly gold paint with the weird white roof. Like it was a model of my dad's old car. I could practically hear the tape of the guy with the voices in your head talking to me. Right? Like my brain hurt when I saw that car. And I'm like, it's all within a week of getting out of school. And I stand there, there's no coincidence in my mind. It cannot be a coincidence that this guy tricked my brain. And I thought I was pretty smart. He tricked me into doing something I didn't want to do. And then a couple days later, I'm reminded of this other time in my life where someone told me you can trick your brain into doing anything. So I started thinking about it. There has to be a connection. And I know now, and we all know now, there is a connection, right? Your brain is so powerful. There are so many studies on your brain. There's a lot of studies on the patterns of thinking in your brain and the words that emerge and the patterns of that thinking, literally how you talk to yourself, and the power of it. You know, some of these examples I'm going to share with you are fresh in my mind because I was just reading an NPR article, but there's so many, you should look at them. 1911, this group of psychologists, and most people think this is when we first really started thinking about patterns of thinking. By accident one day they noticed, and I guess in 1911 it was like really fashionable for women to wear really big hats, right? So they noticed that women, when they walked through doorways with these hats on, they had to duck and kind of tilt their head. They did it even when they didn't wear their hats. And they were like, why is that? So they studied it, and they figured out that if you have a pattern that establishes itself in your brain, absent a conscious decision not to do it, you'll do it. It's not rocket science, right? It's pretty deductive for us now. There's a lot of studies on it. There's another one about doors, oddly enough, right? In 2013, there's a group of scientists that are working with young women that have anorexia. And they notice that they don't walk through the door the way they were expecting them to. Despite the fact that all of them were on the smaller side, and the doors were double doors like we have at the back of the auditorium here, they walked through sideways, like they were sneaking past someone, right? Or squeezing through, despite the fact that there was plenty of room. So they looked at it. They added it to their study. They expanded the scope of their study, and they wanted to figure it out. And they found that they had such patterns of disordered thinking in the brain that it influenced so many of their behaviors. And the crazy thing, like how they walk through doors, and the crazy thing about it is that they had no idea that they had these patterns of thinking running that way in their brain, and they were not aware of the influence on their behavior all the time. You know, there's so many. There's another one, and then I'll stop sharing studies with you. There's one from the University of Pennsylvania. They actually found, when they studied football players, that by imagining throwing a football properly, you have a similar performance gain to when you actually practice it physically. That's crazy, right? You can practice doing something in your mind, and it has not quite the same magnitude of effect, but a similar effect to doing it physically is really unbelievable. Now, I didn't know any of this then, right? I didn't know that the patterns in your brain start being established when you're young. All of the messages that you all hear when you were younger, all the messages that you hear right now, even the ones you're not aware of, they get in somehow. And the more you hear something, the more it takes root. The more your brain accepts it, even if you disagree with it. And these roots grow. And if we use the kind of vernacular from the audio cassette guy, that's when the voices start, right? That's when you start having patterns of behavior influence other ways that you think, the way you feel, and the things that you do. This is why some people, and we see this, right? We all know people like this. They've been told from when they were really young that if they work really hard and they don't give up, that they can do anything, right? Those people act differently than people that get the opposite message, that they can never do anything right. Even though they probably disagree with the message that they can never do anything right. Take it another level, and this is when, like, thinking about it, I wonder if I've really lost my mind sometimes. The voices in your head, if that's what we're calling them, they talk to each other. They're having a conversation in your head. I'm a visual thinker, so I like to think about it like a speed dating event, right? We're in a big auditorium, and all these little like positive and negative patterns of behavior are moving from table to table, talking to each other. And what happens is when they're interacting with each other, the positive patterns lessen the effect of the negative patterns. The negative patterns lessen the effect of the positive patterns, right? It's incredible. I mean, it makes sense, but it's incredible. And this, when you like look at it on a macro level, is why someone who's supremely positive bounces back from bad news much faster than someone who's not. They are less fazed by a setback in their life because they have a lot of other positive thought processes that counteract the negative impact of it. It doesn't make them less likely to understand what's happening, but they feel differently about it, and they might act differently. The converse is true, right? The sweet, sweet joy of an unbelievable moment in life might be fleeting for someone that has predominantly negative thought patterns. Anyways, I didn't know any of this when I was 15, right? But I had listened to a lot of motivational tapes back in the day. So here I am going to conduct an experiment, I decide, on myself. We have a scientist out there, right? He's like shaking his head, no, you can't conduct an experiment on yourself. But I was 15, right? I'm using the word experiment and research very loosely. And so I decide I am going to get cool. Right? But not just like cool, like ridiculously cool. And here's the thing, like it's really hard to believe I wasn't cool in high school, right? My students are telling me this right now. But the truth of the matter is I was so not cool. And I knew it. And that's okay. I own it. So I'm like, I'm going to do exactly what that guy in the tape said I should do. So I woke up, and so none of this is a surprise to anyone that knows me. I'm a very intense person, right? I woke up every day, and I looked in that mirror, and I told myself how amazingly cool I was, right? I was like the best-looking, coolest kid that went to my school. And this is actually really embarrassing, but my wife said I shouldn't share this part, but I'm going to share this part. I actually got blue paint. Blue's my favorite color. And I painted on the wall across from my bed 4 big letters, COOL. Right? And I'm like, I'm going for broke. And then I don't know if it's because I was 15, if it's because I was like desperate for something positive in my life, or what. But after a while, I convinced myself that I was, in fact, pretty cool. Right? Jeremy, our school psychologist, and I are going to have to unpack that later. But, and then something amazing happens. Because we all know, right, like I didn't really change that much about me. I was changing the way I was thinking about me. But my sister, my younger sister, who, by the way, was super cool and always really popular, she comes bursting through the door one day while I'm sitting in my bed, literally talking to myself about how cool I am. And she just like can't take it anymore. She's like, you are so not cool. If you have to tell yourself that you are cool, you are not cool. Even worse, if you have to tell other people that you're cool, you're hurting yourself even more. And then, like, I know she's amazing now, but at the time, oh my God, right? She looks at me and she's like, maybe, and this is brilliant. She didn't mean it to be brilliant, but it was brilliant. Maybe you should not try to be cool. Maybe you should just try to be happy for a little bit so that we're not all miserable being around you. Right? Harsh. So she leaves, and not the norm for me at the time, I didn't react. I just kind of sat there in my bed, like crushed. My experiment a failure. Thinking about how uncool I am, but also thinking like, it's not that I don't feel happy. I also don't feel unhappy. And that was so weird for me to think about. And I realized, and I had never like thought about it, like my predominant emotion My real only emotion that I was consistently feeling was anger. I was mad. And I did the smartest thing I've ever done in my life, still to this day. I asked myself, why? Why was I so mad? And I went all the way back to 6th grade. And I started thinking about all the things that had happened and how they were all out of my control. I was pulling at all the threads. It was horrible. It was painful to think about. And I didn't pick up another experiment right away. It took me a little while as I'm thinking about all this. Thinking about how I was thinking, thinking about how I was feeling. But eventually I decided that I couldn't take my sister's advice. I couldn't try to be happy. It was just too big, right? I was going to do a second experiment. I was just going to try to be thankful for some things in my life that were good every day. But I attacked it with the same intensity I attacked trying to be cool, right? So I was an animal. I was thanking everyone for everything, right? You let me borrow a pencil, it was the best thing that ever happened to me, right? And I would show up on your doorstep 5 years after you did something if I was grasping at straws for something to thank someone for, and I would thank you for something you did 5 years ago. And people didn't really know how to take me. It was kind of like back when I had that rapid transformation during the school year. Nobody knew what was going on with me. Nobody could explain it. Some people actually thought when I thanked them for things, I was making fun of them. And actually, my dad asked me if I was on drugs again. But this was like the watershed moment in my life. I actually started to realize there were so many good things in my life that I was missing because I was so busy being angry at everything. And I also realized that thinking about how I was always angry at things helped me realize when I was getting angry and stop it. And I actually was feeling happier, right? So while I'm going through all this, I start making all of these rules, like these rules for life. I call them like trade secrets for not being a jerk, right? Actually, that's pretty negative. I call them trade secrets. We can call them trade secrets for being a good person. And I can share some of them with you. I'll share 2 of them with you. The first one is one I've been doing every day since I was 15 years old, my first rule. I give sincere thanks 3 times a day. 3 times a day, that's it. Right? Now, I do it a lot more than that. But I give sincere thanks 3 times a day. The second rule is be great. And it's not like be great objectively, oh, he's great. That's not what it is, right? This is something I subject everybody here to all the time. If you ask me how I'm doing, right? Ask me how I'm doing. I'm great. I'm the best I've ever been. I'm living the dream. These are all things I say every day to people when they ask me how I'm doing. But that's actually not where it stops, right? Sometimes people tell you to do that. Everyone hears it, fake it till you make it, right? That's a lie. You're lying to yourself. I'm not saying I'm great because I'm trying to convince myself I'm great. I respond so over the top, so positive, because that's a signal to me. It's actually a moment that I take every time somebody asks me how I'm doing to check in. How do I actually feel? And most of the time, I feel really great. I'm an intense person. We've already established that. So I feel really great, and that's awesome. 99.9% of the time, I'm not lying to you. 0.1% of the time, I don't know. I say I'm great. I might not actually feel great. I might take a second, and I might look at you, and I might say, actually, I'm not feeling great. And depending on how well we know each other, I might say more, I might not. I don't know. But think about how many times a day you are asked how you are or what's up. That's how many times a day I think actively about how I'm feeling and why I'm feeling it. And next step, what am I going to do about it? Because if we don't actively manage these patterns in our brain, they manage us. And if you don't think about how you're going to do that, if you don't have a system or something that works for you, you're just letting it go. You're just letting things happen. I couldn't, clearly, right? We saw where that got me in my life. I couldn't do it. So there's a couple things that go with this, right? I told you this is a very unscience-y way to approach it, right? Scientists actually have a way that behavioral scientists have a way that they talk about this. And I never say them in the right order, so I have a flashcard. What they actually say is that the first thing you do is that you have to identify the emotion in the pattern, right? You have to recognize you're having it, and you have to put a name on it. I'm angry, I'm sad, I'm whatever. The second thing is you have to source it. It's not enough just to say I'm angry. Why are you angry? Where is that anger coming from? You have to pull at those threads. It's not easy. It takes time. It's pretty painful sometimes. The next thing you have to do is identify what you actually want to be. If you're sad, do you want to be happy? That's also not so easy sometimes. And then the next one, and this makes it sound awfully like you're a computer, you have to consciously manage the way you think about that thing and the pattern that controls those things in your brain so that you like overwrite the bad pattern with the good pattern, old pattern with the new pattern. And that's how you go about changing the way your brain works from a very unscience-y person telling you in a very unscience-y way. I used to call this mind over matter, right? That was like my mantra when I was growing up. Mind over matter. Today's going to be great. I'm going to make it great. But I don't call it that anymore. I call it being your own coach. I think that's much more accurate. We all deserve a great coach in our life. We should start with ourselves. It's hard work. Being a coach is really hard work. I've coached a lot of things in my life. To do it well, it's really hard. Anyone can be a coach. But to be a really great coach, the kind of coach you want, that's a lot of work. You want to be your own coach? Forget it. It's a full-time job. But it's worth it. I mean, my 6th grade teacher thought I was going to die before I was 30. That's horrible. I used to teach 6th grade. I never thought that about any of my kids, even the ones that I was really worried about. So this isn't the system for everyone. This is what worked for me. The power of your brain is undisputed. You can't just let it do its own thing. You need to think intentionally about what's going on in there. And you also need to be aware there are a lot of critics to what I'm talking about right now, right? There's a lot of critics for all the research that's out there. There are people that say that you're deceiving yourself when you do this. It's not really honest. And I have 2 answers for that. The first answer is that this is all about honesty. It doesn't work if you're not honest, right? If you wake up every day and you're just trying to be cool, right? Or you tell yourself that you're great when you're not and you don't think about why you're not really great and how you really feel, it doesn't work. So the deception critique doesn't hold up for me. But if I'm being honest with you, I also don't care, right? This works for me. Like I just said, my 6th grade teacher thought I wasn't going to make it. I was so unhappy and angry. That's no way to go through life. I don't want to say that thinking like this and finding this way and the system that works for me saved me from death, but it definitely saved my life in more ways than it didn't. And I'm so profoundly thankful for all the happy little accidents along the way of my life that helped me to stumble onto it. So think about your thinking, listen to the voices in your head, and be your own best coach. Thank you for having me tonight.